Welcome to this morning's webinar regarding site traffic management with Matt Bennett, your current host, Wes van Deventer with ShopCare. And I would just like to welcome you all for today. I do understand everybody's got a pretty busy schedule, and we do really appreciate your time investment in today's webinar. It is a very topical subject matter, so we are very pleased to have Matt here again, sharing for the second time around his expertise with us and the community within ShopCare. Just taking a bit of time out before we start is I just want to say ShopCare, we have been around for just over 3 years, and we have slightly pivoted to, I would say, have more of a holistic view on when it comes to health and safety and well-being within our sectors, and we really to try and get that system change within our industry. Currently, what we are busy with, we have done a couple of workshops, and we are just defining some of those problem statements as we go, and we are planning our next phases within those workshops. Those workshops are, number one, has been around participative ergonomics, manual handling, musculoskeletal disorders, and the other workshop has been around manufacturing and what are the issues within manufacturing. If you find any of those workshops intriguing, you want to be part of that next phase, please don't hesitate to drop me a line, and I will make sure that you are included in the next phase planning as well. For those who don't know, we do have a YouTube channel, ShopCare. Just go have a look. We've got a majority, if not all, of our webinars on there, and quite recently we just finished a 8-part series on machine safety. So if you potentially want to, improve your machine safety skills within your work site, please go have a look at that 8-part series. Each part is no more than 30 minutes, and there's some really good value in there, and it comes from an industry expert by the name of Brent Sutton. He's been doing this for many years. Another thing we are currently really busy with, and I'll touch base on a little bit later on as well, is Data and Insights project, and I will give you a bit more of that. And then lastly, we do have a lot of more planned from a ShopCare perspective, but we'll make that very public very soon. So in a nutshell, don't want to take too much time from Matt Bennett today. So Matt, before I hand over to you, thank you yet again for your time and sharing some of your expertise. We are really lucky to have you. This is the second time around. The first one was brilliant, and I'm pretty sure today's one will be absolutely smashing as well. Thank you again, Matt. I'm handing over to you. Guys, if you need me, I'll be in the chat comments, and so I'm just one click away.
Hey, thank you, Wes, and welcome everyone. I apologize for the slightly delayed start. As is normal with these kind of online things, Wes and I had that like, oh, what login should we use? How do we load the video or the slideshow? And you end up in a slight panic. So I really appreciate Wes's introduction, because it's given me a few moments just to kind of calm down and get myself into the space. Oh, here we go. There we go. So how did I end up here giving a presentation on traffic management plans? I call it vehicle versus pedestrian, because we need to understand the different types of interaction we have. So I had an epiphany while driving back from a machine guarding assessment last year. I'm a huge fan of the machine guarding standards. They're a lovely combination of quantifiable measures, the reasonable reach distances, and qualifiable conditions, the application of ergonomics and human factors. The principle is clear though. Machines operate at a speed greater than the human brain's capacity to calculate impact, consequence, and likelihood. So there needs to be a physical barrier between the moving parts of the machine and the person. And as I drove home, I watched as a 1-ton massive vehicle traveled towards me at 100 kilometers an hour, whilst I was in my 1-ton vehicle doing 100 kilometers an hour. And we were separated by nothing more than social convention. The fact that, or the expectation that both of us would stay on the left-hand side of the road. The duplicity between the machine guarding standards and the road safety standards was so stark to me in that moment. Until we consider the research that shows An individual's acceptance of risk is directly related to the degree of perceived benefit they gain from taking that risk. Our road safety data is really clear. We are prepared to take that risk because the benefits to us of driving are significant. Unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately, in the context of work, we are not given this degree of discretion. And I believe we can do significantly better than basing our safety practices on social convention. Can we aspire to an approach within the workplace of vehicle versus pedestrian safety that more closely represents the machine guarding standard? In this presentation, I'll be making some challenging and potentially controversial statements. It is essential that we invite discomfort in order to generate change. So these statements are not because I'm committed to being right, rather because I'm committed to getting better. I encourage you through the presentation to take notes of those places where it's challenging or uncomfortable, and then let's raise them in the Q&A at the end. Okay, a bit of primer to get you thinking about this space. You'll see I've placed some questions here for you. The first three are very simple yes, no, black, white kind of questions, closed questions. And I'd like you to answer these in the chat. And then you'll see that Wes is also thrown, oh, sorry, no, he's put all the questions in as a poll. So whilst you're answering that, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on myself. This is a really long way away from where I started out teaching kayaking and managing groups in caves. After way too many years of waking up every morning and having to put on wet boots and standing in the rain, I found myself as a fledgling health and safety inspector with the Department of Labor. Again, if that doesn't show my age, I'm not sure what would. It was on a machinery inspection assessment at a log yard where I found their machinery was in pretty good condition. However, I watched as the smoko horn went off and workers from all corners of the work site and probably about 6 front-end loaders all converged on the break room. And I've seen less chaotic chase scenes in Hollywood movies. This got me questioning, and I went looking for comprehensive information on this risk area. I found lots of point of issue solutions, such as wear high vis or put up signage, a barrier. There wasn't anything comprehensive. So I started researching, looking for any data that I could find about interactions and incidents involving vehicles versus pedestrians. This presentation is based on that research and what I learned, and subsequently what can be done to prevent these collisions.
We can give it another couple of seconds for, there's still a couple of people answering questions.
Okay, great. Yeah, so yeah, we'll just wait for those answers to come in, and then I will roll on.
Thank you for participating, guys. I'll be closing the poll now. Okay, you can carry on.
Thanks, Wes. Okay. So we do love the old risk matrix. The title of this particular slide actually comes from an online conversation I was involved with, and the question of the effectiveness of the traditional risk matrix. I propose, for the purpose of this presentation, that we challenge this approach and change our perception of risk, and in particular this risk. You know, I'm not sure if you recognize the image, the banner image there. It's actually from a website I suspect all of you have been to, WorkSafe New Zealand, and I just couldn't resist using it. I'll give you a few moments to just read that, read the slide before pop over. So the idea of changing our perception of risk for the purpose of vehicle versus pedestrian. I'm going to throw this out. Let's think about energy, and I'm putting forward the idea that the greater the energy, the more harm that can be caused. When it comes to this particular subject, the energy from a person is pretty low. If you think about two people bumping into each other, you generally don't get a lot of harm created unless there's a cup of coffee involved. You think about getting hit by a vehicle, whether it's a vehicle hitting a stationary object, a person, or another vehicle, there's a lot more energy, there's a lot more mass in there. So then we think about how do we contain that energy? The brakes on the vehicle remove energy from the system. So that would be a form of containment or control. What's the reliability of that method or of that containment? Well, brakes would require A, servicing, B, they would require visibility for the operator to see that there's an impact potentially going to happen, and then they need response time. The human factors come into play there. So for those of you that do love a risk matrix, here's a very misappropriated version where I've thrown in some of these ideas. Reflect back on the questions that I asked you at the beginning of the workshop. The most influential factor in risk, the risk is the speed of the vehicle or plant. Therefore, placing the control here is going to be the most effective mitigation. So who should have the right of way? Human factors and sightlines are a creation of the physical environment. And I ask, does your worksite create this through physical design, or do we expect the worker to behave in a particular way? So this leads me into my 6 principles of containment. I'm not going to belabor the slide and keep talking through it. I'm going to go through each of these principles in the subsequent slides, and then the last part of the presentation is an idea of how you can start applying them within your particular work area or work site. One-way traffic plans are the most effective thing we can do. What we discover is that if we apply a one-way traffic plan, all the other principles become significantly easier to implement. The opportunity to install a one-way traffic plan will be constrained by the physical features of your site, and in some cases, the tasks or activities that are undertaken. Overall, they will make a huge improvement to the flow of traffic. Even if you can't do it comprehensively or absolutely through your site, looking at the diagram or the picture on the left here, just putting in a main arterial one-way flow and then having side branches to that, such as the parking lot, the main arterial flow will move far more efficiently and reduce so many problems. So a partial implementation of one-way traffic is going to be a massive improvement. Think of being in a supermarket car park. This is the common place where we experience this frequently. Have you ever had somebody walk behind you as you were reversing? And the odds are on that it caught you by surprise and you jumped on the brakes. Now reverse that. How many times have you casually walked behind a reversing vehicle? Simply, our perception and subsequent risk assessment of reversing vehicles is distorted. Paradoxically, I fully support reversing into parking spaces. However, this isn't a contradiction. It's a parking space is a closed space, at least in principle. And so as you reverse into that space, you are aware of the boundaries of it and what's in that space. This makes it a significantly safer maneuver than reversing out of a parking space into a dynamic or mobile site where you have pedestrians, other vehicles encroaching on that area. If you've been successful at creating one-way traffic flow, any parking on the side of that arterial flow will actually end up being angled parking. Again, it may feel contradictory. However, when you start examining it, you start to realize that you've only got movement in one plane or one direction. So you're not trying to keep conscious or cognizant of as many moving obstacles, I suppose. So next we look at reducing or even eliminating intersections. Chuck Norris has got absolutely nothing to do with this, but I just kind of like the humor there. So imagine a journey that you travel regularly in busy traffic. And if you don't have to do this, you're super lucky. Now visualize making a right-hand turn, preferably at a busy intersection. Where's your attention? What are you trying to think about? What does it feel like? Now flip that to taking a left-hand turn. And obviously this only works for people that are in New Zealand or other countries that drive on the left-hand side. And you'll start to, if you've got a good imagination, you'll start to recognize how many things or the difference in how many things you're actually trying to pay attention to and the speed of which things are happening. There's a very powerful exercise you can do about and discovering your blind spots. So as we turn our head, our eyes have to blink. We cannot, our eyes can't scan. They can only stay focused on a single image at a time. So as we turn our head, we have to blink to change that image every time. And the process of turning our head and blinking will naturally create blind spots for slow moving small obstacles or namely pedestrians and cyclists. As we scan our head, we will miss them. When we take a left-hand turn, we don't need to scan our head quite as much because we are only attentive in one direction. We see the pedestrian, we see the cyclist, we see the moving vehicle. Very important principle for us to start to understand. And we start thinking about our sight lines. In the last slide, I asked you to imagine being in a vehicle at an intersection. Now I want you to imagine being a pedestrian trying to cross the street. Put yourself on the corner, maybe a 90-degree corner. If you're on the inside of the corner, what's it like? What can you see? How easy is it to see things? Now put yourself on the outside of the corner. You're looking left, you're looking right. What's it like to see? What's the difference? And it's sight lines. We can see a greater distance from the outside of the corner. At the opening of this webinar, I asked you about your sight requirements for high vis. There is a common belief that high vis makes the wearer more visible. There are two types or two standards in high vis. There's the day requirement, which requires a fabric of a certain luminosity. And there's the nighttime, which has the requirement for reflective surfaces. We get confused. The reflective strips really don't do a lot during the day, and the luminous fabric doesn't really do a lot at night. But that's not what actually research has found about making objects visible. There's been a lot of research done by cycling advocates in the roading industry on this matter. I strongly recommend a podcast, The Safety of Work, on this matter, episode 72, How Visible is High-Vis Clothing? The upshot from the research is it's less about the clothing and more about the situation. High-vis only stands out if it is in contrast to the background. So if you have a heavily cluttered background, the person, the clothing will blend into it. Try spotting, particularly at night, try spotting someone in high-vis in a sea of road cones. It's just all reflected light and very, very confusing. So if you want to improve visibility, give people longer sight lines and declutter the background. Creating space. In some ways, I feel this is a little bit self-evident, but also that's probably a little arrogant because I've been looking at this for so long. I guess that image on the left-hand side tells a good story for me. There'd be, you've got multiple vehicles working with multiple different activities. People will be hidden in there. The sight lines are confused. Movement is tight. So you're having to keep, if you think about it, a forklift loading that truck, how many corners of the forklift is the operator having to pay attention to? Where is the movement path for the pedestrians? So the pedestrians are forced to poke their nose out from a corner. It's a recipe for collision. And so the idea of creating more space, designated zones for singular activities, and thinking about all the activity requirements. So, are we blocking a pedestrian pathway by doing this? Have we given an option for vehicles to move past this zone without interfering with the activity? And then finally, separate with barriers. Okay, this is I pose another visualization activity for you. Think of that image, the left-hand image with the stop sign on the gate. So you walk up to that gate, and where's the latch? Well, if you're clever, you don't need a latch because the gate opens towards you, which means that you just reach down and pull it backwards. But even if there is or isn't a latch, where are you looking? And I hazard that you're probably going to look at either the hand that grabs the gate or your feet, so you don't trip up as you step backwards. Yeah. Is that where the hazard is? Is that where the collision is going to be going to occur? What have you put the gate release at eye level? Not a particularly practical idea, but think about where your eyes are now looking. You're now cognizant of the potential problem. The principle here is getting inside the mind of the person. Equally, your barriers and other surrounding features, try to create diagonal lines. Our eyes will follow a diagonal line. So now we start directing people to where we want them to see. Both of these ideas are equally applicable to pedestrians and vehicle operators. One of the issues with new forklift operators is they often need to look down at the controls. So they're not actually looking where movement is occurring. They're having to be focused on their hands, essentially. So something to throw into your thinking. Okay, those are the 6 principles. I could go on about them for much, much longer, but you'll be really tired of my voice. So we'll move on to applying it to your work site. This is the crunchy part. You may be feeling overwhelmed at this point, that it's near impossible to do any of this at your work site. However, in his book, The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey taught us, start with the end in mind. Let's create a big picture plan. Grab a map of your site. You may already have one. You may be able to, you can grab an image from Google Earth or the web, or you can hand draw it. This particular one is of a log yard and wood manufacturing facility I did some work for a couple of years ago. And first thing I do is I identify where people work, the static sites. So we've got offices, we've got toilet blocks, break rooms, manufacturing facilities, and equipment stores. The next thing I put in are the attractions. These are the places and facilities that people need and want to go to. The toilets, break rooms, offices, even areas that have Wi-Fi or cell phone coverage. Then I draw in the routes that vehicles take. It's worth taking time observing. What you're seeing on this image, the red line is a single, it's a GPS track of a single loader in the time between work start and morning smoko. The yellow line are public vehicles. Now I draw in my pedestrian movements. That's the blue lines. And yeah, it is. I really encourage you to draw these things down because it will really help you get a visual image and understand the intersections. Okay, so with your map, you can now see with greater clarity where the problem exists. Talk to people involved with each location and hear their story. This breathes light into the picture. You know, I see all this intersections or all the crossing of movement. How much of a problem is it? That area doesn't seem to have a lot of overlap, but people might tell you a different story. Don't try and change what you can't change. Yeah. However, if somebody says it can't be done or it can't be changed, challenge that. Is it real or is it just imaginary? I had an example not so long ago of a physical feature that people are like, oh, we can't move that. We cannot move that problem. I'm like, it's a shelf. In the grand scheme of things, it is simply a shelf. And we could pick it up and move it. And when we did, we were able to open up that space. We were able to create the space and create a delineated works area with clearer movement. So challenge any time somebody says it can't be done. But again, that whole idea of don't try changing what you can't, you know, the office building is always going to be the office building. Movement is behavior. Often it's habitual, and that can be changed. It can be changed with physical barriers. And again, forcing that one-way traffic plan, one-way movement will be a very effective way of doing that. And modify activities to reduce the problems. I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, going to a work site and you know, at Smoko, all the loaders and the workers converged on the break room simultaneously, and it was chaotic. And one of the things they did, which I just think is genius, is they changed it so that the front end loaders, they moved the Smoko horn to the refueling place for the front end loaders. The front end loaders would go to break, blow the horn, and then the workers would converge on the break room. And so they basically separated the two movements. And I'm just like, they couldn't separate the path, the road and the pedestrian path. So they just separated the activity. I was like, that's really clever, right? And then finally, solve your remaining point-specific problems. You don't have to do everything at once. You probably won't be able to do everything at once. So solve them just solve the ones that you can. So here's our sort of final understanding of this particular site's problem, right? Area 1, sort of down in the bottom left-hand corner. This is an area of specific concern. There were a lot of vehicle and pedestrian movements. So we need to change that with delineation, barriers that create, that fix the direction of movement and keep pedestrians to the side. Area 2, that little area to the sort of center bottom of the map, doesn't have high movement. There wasn't high volume. However, it was where the visitors and customers entered, and they have a very specific challenge in that they don't know the site, they don't know the rules, and they don't know what goes on there. And so it was essential to implement or introduce very clear barriers that direct them where you need them to go. Then we go to the sort of the bottom boundary. It's identified as area 3. And this is where visitors would then travel to pick up goods. And there was also a pedestrian path there. And quite simply, needed to install a pedestrian path along the trees, the tree side of it. And we put in a barrier along there. And then the large area, area 4, this is the log yard, and it was a lot of loader movements. We excluded pedestrians from the site and made it one-way traffic. And that was incredibly effective. Obviously, there needed to be reversing in there. However, the one-way traffic and exclusion of pedestrians was very successful. That's really it from me. I've spoken almost flat out for 30 minutes, which I apologize. I hope I haven't sent you to sleep or driven you nuts yet. Lots of concepts in there, but I go back to my opening where I said what's uncomfortable, what's challenging, and those are good things to throw on the Q&A. I'll turn to Wes to filter the questions and throw them at me, and I'll see what trouble I can keep out of.
Thank you very much for that, Matt. I really appreciate it. I really liked your visual representation of movement, and I think it paints a different pictures for, especially for some, not just for yourself, but also if you want to potentially communicate preventative strategies to senior leaders or middle management. So I think that's a really good concept and a good takeaway from today as well.
Yeah. And I guess that's something I didn't put into the presentation here, but once you've come up with a your current state, so you go through this planning process, and then you get to a certain point. Again, publish the map so that the map is a very powerful way for people to understand, to take on information, and keep changing it as the site changes.
Yeah, definitely. Then there's about 6 questions I've got here. One is, well, the first one is a bit get your take on the poll question. So question 1 is, on your site who has the right of way, and the answer was either a vehicles plant or pedestrians, and the result from that is 56% answered vehicles plant and 44% said pedestrians. To number 2, we're talking about site, does your site traffic risk management plan focus on either hazards or controls? 67% said hazards, 33% said controls. And then the third one, does your site require the wearing of high vis? And 78 said yes, and 22% said no. Thinking about all that, what is your feedback?
Look, yeah, there is no absolute answer to any of it. I did plant those questions in part to just get our brains ticking into the subject. High vis is always a really contentious one. You probably got the impression that I'm a little bit dismissive of high vis, and that's not completely true. Legislatively, regulatory, so COPTM, Code of Practice for Temporary Traffic Management, is very clear that any person working inside the road reserve, working in the proximity to moving vehicles or plant, must be wearing high vis. And so let's not challenge that. That is just, it's a fact. And then you start extrapolating that out. Well, if you're inside the road reserve, you have to wear high vis. Why would that be any different any other time you're working in the vicinity of mobile plant or vehicles? And I think that it does add a layer of protection, of benefit. Equally, don't think that that's actually going to protect you. I've never seen a high vis do anything when the person got hit by a forklift. It doesn't work. It doesn't help. So what does help is making the person more visible, more identifiable, and that's about the background that they are working in. What sits behind them? Are they actually standing out? Equally, having an operator, a vehicle or plant operator that is able to see all the things that are going on. If they need to be maintaining 360-degree observation for every moving or any possible movement, they're going to become cognitively exhausted, and eventually they'll hit something, whether it be a stationary object or a moving one. Yeah, high vis, it's not a panacea. See it for what it is, I guess, is my my input there. And then hopping up to the top one, who has right of way, vehicles, plant, or the pedestrian? Again, it's a similar thing. I don't think it's so much of one over the other. It's understanding the context within it, which it's happening. Who has the most cognitive load on them at the time? This will change depending on the site, the activity, even the specific intersection or location. Yeah, but that idea of cognitive load is really important. Yeah, and to be honest, often almost exclusively pedestrians will be moving slower and doing less. They don't have, we don't have to pull levers and press pedals when we're walking. We're just walking. Well, walking and looking at our cell phones, I suppose, is a cognitive loading. So yeah, but because they're moving slower and have less to do, I think it's reasonable to say that pedestrians should usually give way to vehicles, but don't take that as a verbatim. Really challenge or question your working environment. Yeah, and then the hazards versus controls one, again, I think about, there's a wonderful statement I probably misappropriate to Sidney Decker: you cannot manage hazards Yeah, manage your controls to those hazards. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Thank you for your clarification there. Coming back to your slide around gates and forklifts or forkliftways for moving of plant vehicles, etc. Do you have any experience in the next field, and can you just give us some insights? And that's regarding sensors and gates. Instead of just trying to open up a gate, or it's low enough to climb over, rather to have some sort of a sensor that will prevent the gate from opening when a vehicle or plant is in the vicinity. Does it work, and is it practical?
I like this question because the person who's asking it is actually, I mean, we're heading into that really high tech end of machine guarding, which is that's the challenge I posed to us at the beginning: is what would it look like if we applied the same standards to machine guarding? So you're almost talking about interlocking. Great to think in that way. You're talking about this is an expensive application, so I would start looking at this at those really high risk places, sort of high traffic, high speed areas where the vehicle operator has limited opportunity to respond. You think about your railway crossings with automated gates. That's obviously we don't necessarily, many of us have that happening within our workplace, but that's the kind of solution you're thinking about. It could also be something to think about for, I used my last slide, or not quite last, I talked about the entrance to the log yard with visitors coming in who don't know the site. So really putting in those controls. You're now saying we cannot trust the person to make a good decision, even when we've done everything we can to give them the right comprehension or understanding of the environment. I also, similarly, I said in that same slide, excluding pedestrians from the log yard. And if there was, for whatever reason, behavioral deviation, people kept on coming up with excuses why they needed to go into the log yard, or refused to accept the change in behavior, maybe we'd put in some kind of access control into that space. I think there is a place for it. It is functional, but you are adding a high level of engineered and technical complexity, which comes with issues of maintenance and programming, I suppose you could say. So I'd be only going down that way when I've got a really distinct and elevated issue. I do tend to trust people. I believe that people generally want to do the right thing when I design, or when the workplace designs and sets things up with a full understanding of the situation. So again, I made that comment. Get inside the mind of the person and see things from the way they see it. I hope I answered that question.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Matt. Sticking with forklifts, what are your thoughts? And I mean, I've been in this position as well. What are your thoughts on forklifts or forkliftways using their horn or hooter before going around a corner? Because sometimes it's just because there's so much going on, you constantly hear the hooter or the horn going on, and it just starts becoming part of that background noise. So what are your thoughts around that?
Very similar to high vis, really. It's not that it's a bad idea, but you've got to think about how is it blending into the work site? My current work site, we're a metal manufacturing industry or business. We have a foundry. Nominally, if you divide our production facility into 4 zones, the quietest one has a baseline noise of 84 decibels. One operates at a baseline of 93 decibels. And if you drop a metal bar, it bounces up to kind of 100. So how loud does a horn have to be for it to actually stand out? It's not that using the horn is ineffective or wrong. You've just got to remember that it will have a depreciating degree of effectiveness. So we do have the requirement for the use of horns on our work site, despite a high baseline noise. It does help to a certain degree, and so I guess everything helps. It all adds up, but it doesn't. It certainly doesn't meet my. Well, if you think of my continuum of physical guarding on machines versus social convention, I wonder if the horn is probably sitting a little bit on the social convention side of things.
Yeah, thanks. Going back to your retail parking lot example, what would you recommend to the retail sector when it comes to public parking lots? Where space is limited, but also extremely valuable.
Yeah,
so to reverse park and customers to get access to the boot or trunk, depending on what you want to call it, is very limited and could cause vehicle damage as well.
Yeah. Oh, look, I feel for the retail sector on parking lots. There was a new supermarket went into Christchurch, or maybe a year and a half ago, and I thought they'd done a valiant effort at trying improving the parking lot. It was the first time I'd really seen it. So you've got getting the public, the average person, to reverse park is going to be near on impossible. They're not going to do it. That may change over time, but right now, we have to live in that reality. And so they had nose-to-nose parking, and they put a big wide footpath down the middle of between the cars. And I thought, that's great. So now I can get out of my car. I don't have to walk into the movement lane. I can move to the front of my car and be on a footpath. I'm like, wonderful. And then when you come back with the supermarket trolley, you come down the footpath, but there was nowhere there was no ramp to take your supermarket trolley off the footpath and to the back of your car. And so inevitably what happens is people would leave the supermarket trolleys in the middle of the footpath, which means you've now got an obstacle to the footpath. And so kind of hadn't thought through the whole sequence. My recommendation to the supermarket industry, or sorry, not supermarket, the retail industry, is force the car park to be one-way traffic. So even if that means that a person drives in a bit of a zigzag, snaking way to find a park, you make it one way, herringbone the parking so that people are all reversing, and they're only keeping an eye out in one direction as they get out of their parking lot, and then put a footpath in front of the cars. You want to, I think we need to start being really dogmatic and say that if you think about the people that are in a retail parking lot, we've got to get those people off the vehicle movement lane. I think about children, parents or a parent with a couple of kids, elderly people, all of these folks have, distractions that make it super unreliable for them to be aware of all the different movements that are going on around them. So the best solution I can come up with is make it one-way vehicle movement. And if you put in herringbone parking, that absolutely incentivizes the traffic to move in that one way. Because if you think about trying to turn into a herringbone park from the wrong direction, people are like, I'm not going to, I'll go the right way.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that. And I appreciate that. Second to last question that I've got with me is, what do you believe are the focus areas for New Zealand to create system change when it comes to traffic management?
Ooh. We often lean to government the regulator to create system change. And that has an influence. It is a strong influence. It is, I think, inherently limited, because nobody likes being told what to do. So there's this wonderful duplicity, right? When we want something to change, we look to the regulator, like, you need to do something here. But as soon as the regulator starts looking at us, like, go away, we know what we're doing. So we've got to appreciate that push-pull, that duplicity in there. So the regulator has a part to play. But they will always be a lag to social expectation. Not always, but generally they'll be a lag to social expectation. Government, the politicians will always lag to social expectation. So what other mechanisms have we got? Industry groups, ShopCare, identifying the issues that exist within their sector and creating guidance, even codes of conduct, standards. These really, really help. That does then fall on the individual, in this case, the individual workplace, to aspire to that, to say, yeah, we're gonna give this a good solid crack. We're gonna have a go at this. And so that then falls on us as practitioners to stay abreast of what are the challenges that are faced both within my workplace and my sector, and to be aspirational, to say, it's one thing to say, oh yeah, I'm aware of that issue, but to aspire to, and I'm going to try and be really good in this space. The latest safeguard survey, and there's another piece of research I looked at recently that was looking at the qualities of good health and safety practitioners, is that they're optimistic, and I'm advocating for being aspirational. We are, as practitioners, as people that sit within the business, we are limited by the mentality of the culture of the workplace and the leaders that exist within. That question about the supermarket car park, you said, when you're limited by space, and ultimately, the supermarket could, extend its car park by 100 square meters, making it possible to put in a bigger footpath, but that's going to reduce the retail space, right? So there is a financial question in there. And so leadership that places the human experience, and that's both the customer and the worker, is really important. And I think there was a really good report done. It was led by Mike Cosman. It was delivered by, it's the Good Governance series. I think it's the Institute of Directors, or maybe Forum NZ. And it looked at how to influence boards and directors, the governance of business. And I think as health and safety practitioners, we've got a game to play in there as well. How do we influence our business leaders? So there's a lot of work to do in that space, and I don't have a singular answer, but I do know, for me, it's about being aspirational and staying really informed, and not accepting the status quo. Again, I go back, safety on the road is the result of social convention. Can we make it better?
Yeah,
not sure I'm ready to hop in a self-driving car just yet, but one day.
Definitely. And this last one is a pretty easy question. And it's hopping basically on one of your last points you just made is, could you please share the link to the page with the comment regarding dodgy risk assessments? But I'm assuming this also includes the podcast that you mentioned as well. And then this last one, the influencing piece, if you could share potentially those 3 links, I could share this with everybody that attended today.
Okay, what I'll do is the dodgy risk assessments, that was a conversation with, it was actually initiated by the author of Challenging the Safety Quo. I will remember it. That's on LinkedIn, and I will the influencing, that report from on governance, that's available online. I will send all these links to you, Wes, and then it can, you can disseminate it along with this PowerPoint. There you go.
Excellent. No, thank you for that. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. If you've got any further questions for either myself or for Matt, drop me a line and I'll make sure that Matt gets the question and he'll answer you in a timely fashion, or myself. Before we go, guys, thank you, Matt, yet again for coming along. Thank you for sharing some of your expertise. It's been really eye-opening today as well. I really appreciate it. There's a lot of takeaways from today as well. And before I go, any last words?
Hey, thanks for the opportunity, Wes and ShopCare audience. I would really appreciate any feedback you have to me about either content or presentation style from this. That's my gem from doing these. So yeah, you can email me directly. My email's in the PowerPoint, or send it via Wes, but I'd really appreciate any feedback you have for me. And yeah, always willing to assist or share ideas. It helps keep me frosty. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Matt, again. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. Thanks, Matt. Hey, guys, if I don't get to speak to you, have a lovely rest of your day and enjoy the long weekend, guys. Cheers.